This week on LCARA Ham Radio, we're going to start buttoning up the GMRS repeater. We're going to do some final installation. We're going to make things nice and neat, and we're going to do a little bit of testing. But ultimately, we're going to pretty much finalize the build of this repeater system. This week on LCARA Ham Radio. Well, we are going to start buttoning up this repeater. As those of you that have been following along with this GMRS repeater build, it has been quite a journey. And one of our stated goals was to utilize off-the-shelf parts or parts that we may have laying around to reduce the cost of building this repeater. One of the things that we had done here was to take a cable out of an old Motorola setup that AC4DM had and install it here in the repeater in this cabinet. Well, it had an N connector, as you saw just a moment ago, and we wanted that to be an SO239. So we went ahead and installed a cable with that end so that we'd have an end that's a little bit more common for connecting to the antennas at our repeater site, the abandoned repeater site at that. Alrighty, so we actually installed this pull-up switch, and I think some of you might remember that from the previous video. This pull-up switch is because the radios are coming with an active low, we're pulling it up to be an active high into the Microcomputer Concepts controller. And we just had connected it based on the wires that it already had, and so we needed to shorten those wires, but we also needed to install this little pull-up switch much more neatly than just with octopus wires. It actually only had 4 wires, so I guess it was a quadrupus. But in any event, we're creating just a small little aluminum bracket here with the holes, and we're applying some heat conductance on the back side of this. We're also going to be placing a small cover over that and then installing the actual board onto this particular little bracket. And so AC4DM is installing that little slice of wafer, and then we are in the process of installing the pull-up switch on that particular bracket, and that's to not only dissipate heat, but again, just to install it much more neatly in the termination panel. We also needed to shorten some of those wires, and that'll be coming up in just a minute. And again, some of the skill sets that we're learning in this project is just being neat, which is a part of the NEC standards, and of course Master Electrician AC4DM is very much used to making things as neat as possible, easy to understand, easy to troubleshoot if necessary. Alrighty, so we're affixing this little bracket now to the bottom of the termination cabinet, if you will, or the box, and so he's just getting that installed. Now the wires are still a little bit too long. We're going to take care of that here in just a few moments. But you can also see sneaking into the frame there a little bit some of the other wires that we've run from the jumper, from the bridges. We're jumpering the receive radio over to the controller, and from the controller over to the transmit bridge, which is actually in the middle. So the receive's in the top right corner, transmit is in the middle there, as he continues to kind of futz with getting that little bracket installed for the pull-up switch. We were thinking we might have to install another pull-up switch for another purpose for the fan, but ultimately that did not, we deemed as unnecessary. So here we're going through with, I guess, the second try in getting this little bracket installed, and just we need to get the nut on the end of that screw. And as anybody who's done these projects, you know, your big fat sausages get in there. Sometimes it's not easy to get where you need things. He's actually got a neat little tool that you can put your little hex nut in there and just place it on the screw, but it wasn't handy at that particular moment in time. So I think he finally got it started there, and that means now we are getting the bracket in place. in the cabinet here. Again, this little wider view, you can see some of the other jumper wires that we've run from the bridges. The camera moves a little bit here and there, but you can kind of see some of that sneaking off of pin 3 there in the top right, pin 4 and 5 on the transmitting radio bridge. Alrighty, so we've got these long wires. We've basically utilized some rough estimates by pulling the wire over to where it needs to plug in on the bridge. This is a ground wire, so we could have basically plugged this in anywhere. It's common ground on this cabinet, and obviously we're just stripping it off a little bit, going to twist it a smidge and put a little connector on there so that we can actually install it on the bridge where we have a ground already located. Sometimes when you have two of these connectors going into the same point, you need to put the connectors back to back, so that way they can actually fit in the same location. Alrighty, so we're getting that tightened down now for the ground wire, and of course we're going to do the same thing for the rest of the connectors as well, because of we want to make sure that pull-up switch does its job. Active low coming out of the receive radio to active high, and that's why we're calling it a pull-up switch. If I'm not mistaken, this was a PNP resistor to achieve that particular function. And of course, if you don't have some of these parts, you can get these from a number of sources online, the pull-up switches and so forth, diodes, resistors, and whatnot. And in these types of projects, it's amazing how often you still need those kinds of components when building your own circuits. Ham radio has always been about building. And again, as we've mentioned many times before in other videos, ham radio is one of the first maker hobbies there ever was. Going green to green here, now that we've shortened the length of wire, we've got our connector on there. Again, we're going to go back to back since we're going to be putting two connectors on the same place. Actually, this is just a single, my apologies. I think we just pulled the old one out. Alright, so we're getting that finalized, and now you can see we have all the wires connected, black, green, orange, and another one in there, plus we have the other jumper wires going to other locations, the yellow wire there, and you can see we've routed the yellow and the orange underneath to come over here to the controller, because again, the controller is expecting an active high, not an active low. Now this little guy right here, this is not a pull-up switch, this is actually a little circuit that AC4DM has built to supply voltage. And what we've done is we've come off the PTT bridge pin, and we power or basically charge up the capacitor on that circuit. And what it will do is it will run the fan. It opens up another transistor, and it's going to run the fan as long as that capacitor has enough charge. And so that's actually how we actually have the fans come on anytime that somebody actually comes into the repeater and the receiver goes over to the transmitter in that PTT circuit. So we actually took a fan component out of an older Motorola cabinet, again, that he had. You can actually build this pretty easily. A lot of these fans are just readily available, and but we had this on a really nice bracket coming out of the a different Motorola cabinet, and so we're repurposing this fan so that we can actually point this on the transmit radio to keep it cooler again when somebody presses that PPT. Nice view of this little bracket, this little rack mount bracket for the fan, and again, it's going to be all the way over to the right so we can focus air down towards the transmit radio. Now ultimately, just for transparency, that fan was creating a lot of noise when you would key up the mic. We ended up going to a quieter fan, but it would ultimately be installed and assembled as you see here. And as we back away, folks, we're pretty much done with this repeater. We have done some testing already. It already transmits just fine at about 27, 28 watts, and we're just chuffed. We can't wait to get this installed at the abandoned repeater site. I hope you enjoyed this series. You could utilize much of what you've seen in this series for building a VHF repeater or taking the same radios and using UHF. We're using these particular radios as a demonstration purpose for GMRS, but you could have used other radios. And right here, we're just about to do the key drop. There's the panel. We're going to paint some of this, I think. Key drop right there, just like a mic drop. Just a beautiful piece of work, and there were lots of us that worked on this project. KK4JPX, KK4KTV, KY4CKP, KY4BDP, myself, KY4DAG, WM4LM, AC4DM. There's so many of our club members that got involved on this project. Well, folks, coming up, we're going to take this very same repeater and we're going to take it to the abandoned repeater site. So stay tuned for part 7 when we go and install this and put it out into the community.